And welcome. Today we're going to be taking apart a Lenovo Ideapad S940-14IIL. This is the 2019 version of the ultra portable 14-inch Lenovo touchscreen laptop. So the first thing we're going to need is a small Torx bit. This is a T6, and we're going to need this to take off the bottom case. And then once we take that bottom case off, it's probably going to be a small Phillips bit. Alright, so we'll go ahead and remove the 4 outside screws. Now this Torx bit, it seems like it's kind of in between a 5 and a 6, so I'm assuming there's a Torx 5.5. But the 6 will work fine. You just kind of make sure you have it centered. And once we get these 4 screws out, we'll try to pop off that bottom case. Sometimes they hide some screws underneath the feet. So I guess we'll find out in a second if that's the case here. Alright, so we got those screws out, and we're going to take a little spudger and just pry up a little bit on the back part of the bottom case. And until we get it kind of moving up a little bit. And it seems like it wants to kind of pop off. See if we can get a view in there. It's kind of hard to see. So I can kind of move the center part here. So it looks like it is detaching. Okay, there we go. I'll go ahead and pop the other side. Especially when they're brand new, since this is a 10th gen i7, I'm gonna assume this laptop has never been opened. So when they're brand new, the little clips on the sides can be really hard to take off. So you sometimes need to give it a little bit of force to get those things to pop. And we're just gonna gently wiggle it until we unpop the rest of those snaps. So it looks like there's just the 4 screws, and then we can remove that bottom case. So taking a look at the inside here, looks like we have an NVMe SSD. This is a 2280. So it looks like once you get that bottom cover off, it's easy to replace your SSD. It looks like the battery is just a few Phillips screws, which is good. And the fan and heatsink assembly looks pretty accessible, as well as the in-out board here. So all in all, it looks like it's pretty easy to take apart this laptop. So we're going to go ahead and remove the battery first. And another thing on this laptop I forgot to mention is we're not going to be taking apart the display assembly. And believe me, you don't want to. They are pretty close to the MacBook Airs, where you need some kind of specialty tools, a heat gun, and a lot of patience, and even then you're probably still going to break something. So in this case, we're going to leave the display assembly complete, but we're going to tear down the rest of the laptop, and at least until we get to the keyboard, which will usually stay with the palm rest as an assembly. A lot of them aren't removable anyways, but I guess we'll find out when we get there. So we'll go ahead and we're going to remove the screws for the battery. And I did switch to a Phillips bit. Looks like all of the screws inside here are Phillips, and I have a 2.0. So it's just a kind of a small head Phillips bit, and I believe that's 2 millimeters. If you have a precision set, it should have that in there. All right, once we have those battery screws out, we have the battery connector here, and we're just gonna kind of gently pull back the battery a little bit. This one doesn't look like it has tabs. Usually on the battery connector, they'll have a couple tabs where you can pull, but in this case, it was just, it's kind of a flat side on each. So I would say it is okay to just pull that connector straight out with the battery. Usually with the power cables, they're pretty strong and you're not going to hurt anything by pulling on that connector. But it's with the battery and DC jacks, are probably the only ones that you want to do that with. Otherwise, they'll have some kind of tab or something that you can grab onto with your fingernails or a spudger and work it free. So it looks like just those few screws and that connector, and we remove the battery. Okay, so now that we have the battery removed, we're going to go ahead and remove the Phillips screw for the SSD drive. It's up to you if you want to try to disconnect and replace your SSD without unplugging the battery, but if you're just replacing your SSD, you might be able to get away with just pulling that connector out if you can, and that will de-energize the laptop and make it a little bit safer to upgrade these parts. So again, that is an NVMe 2280 SSD. All right, give it another look. Looks like this battery does have a broken tab. It's pretty common for these really thin batteries to have some kind of broken piece. I mean, if the laptop is jarred a little bit, it just breaks these. They're ultra thin, that's maybe 2 millimeters thick. So it's just something to look out for if you're buying a battery. Make sure those clips are all there. All right. So I'll give it another look-see, and this motherboard apparently has an integrated Wi-Fi card, and it looks like the RAM is going to be integrated into the board. So if you need to replace or if you want to upgrade your RAM, you're out of luck. It looks like the only thing you can really upgrade on this is the SSD drive. All right, so we'll continue, and we're going to go ahead and remove the screws for the SSD interface board. So we have that nice and free, and then this type of connector we're just going to flip up on the little dark retainer bar, and we'll probably have some adhesive on this. There we go. And then just make sure to pop that connector up before you start pulling, because as you saw, it's pretty strong adhesive, and then once it's, it can give way at the last second, so you don't want to yank it out of that connector. You want to make sure that connector's open so it'll just pull out. All right, next, looks like we have easy access to all the fan screws and heatsink screws. So we're going to go ahead and pop those antennas off of the integrated Wi-Fi card and just kind of move them out of the way from the fan assembly so we're able to remove it. And for the fan connectors, it's just a simple type connector that pulls straight out. So it's got the 2 tabs and just push it straight out. I'm going to do the same for the other side. If you can get your fingernail in there, just come straight out of that connector. I'll go ahead and remove the Lenovo sticker, or just pop the screwdriver through it. So we're going to go ahead and remove the rest of the fan and heatsink screws. It looks like they have these little pads on top, so just if you can't see the screws, they're going to be stuck under these. So we'll go ahead and remove all these screws. Alright, so we got all of the screws out from the fans. The screws holding in the heatsink have a retainer on the back so they don't come all the way out, they just loosen. So now that we have those nice and loose, we're just going to give the fan and heatsink assembly a little wiggle, and you see how it just kind of pops up. This is a newer laptop, so the thermal paste hasn't had a chance to get really hard yet. So this was a very easy heatsink fan assembly to remove. And it looks like the fans are replaceable, individual from the heatsink. It's just a really tiny Phillips bit screw. It's probably going to be like a 0.5 or smaller. Those are really tiny. Otherwise you could just buy it as an assembly. Alright, so we'll give it another look. It looks like we have one in-out board here on the side. So we're going to go ahead and remove it. So we'll go ahead and first disconnect the motherboard connection. And once you get those screws out, just get your fingernail under the little ledge there, and you can pop it up and off with your fingernail. And they also have some decent adhesive on the bottom of the ribbon. So I'm going to go ahead and disconnect the other side of the ribbon here. It looks like the adhesive that they have on the bottom of that ribbon is pretty strong, and it's peeling off the backing to the keyboard. It's not a big deal, but I kind of like to have a cleaner disassemble if I can. So yeah, it's really thin, this backing here, so it's more than likely going to come off with the ribbon. That's just like it's just a leaf. It's so thin right there. All right, and then we'll go ahead and pull that speaker connection out. And unfortunately, they did not give any tabs for that speaker connection, so if you can dig your fingernails in there to pull it out. Otherwise, you might need to kind of pull on that cable a little bit. I see a small ribbon here underneath, so I don't know what that is. I'm going to disconnect it for now. And it's the same type of connector as over there. You just flip up on the little bar, pull the ribbon out, and it's best to flip it back down so it doesn't get damaged. Alright, so we'll finish removing those Phillips screws. Alright, one last check. I don't see any more ribbons connected to it. And we're going to pull up on the back and kind of move it laterally because those ports are sticking through the palm rest assembly a little bit. Alright, so moving on to, looks like we can do the motherboard now. So the first thing we're going to want to do with the motherboard is disconnect all of the ribbons that we can see going to it. And it looks like there's a few. And then once we get those connectors out, then we can go ahead and remove the screws, and that should allow us to remove the motherboard. Alright, so for the touchpad connector, it's just the same. Flip it up and pull that ribbon out. And the ribbons have kind of a T shape, so you need to lift up before you can pull it out, otherwise it's not going to come out of that connector. And same kind of connector for the keyboard. And keyboard backlight. And we got one more speaker connection over here. And looks like one Wi-Fi antenna taped to the top of the motherboard. So we'll go ahead and peel that up and off. Alright, so giving it a last look, looks like we have all those ribbons out, and we're going to remove the rest of the motherboard screws. All right, looks like there is one more ribbon here for the display assembly. Oops. So it's kind of a wide connector. You'll have to flip that one up with your fingernail. And we need to get something underneath it to pull it out. I also want to mention, if you just need to replace the display assembly, it doesn't look like you have to go through all of this. As soon as you open up that bottom case, as long as you disconnect the video cable connection here and the two Wi-Fi antennas, it looks like you'll just need to remove the 6 hinge screws to remove the display from the chassis. So if you have a broken screen and you just want to replace it as an assembly, you're looking at 1 ribbon, 2 Wi-Fi antenna connections, and the 6 screws holding on the hinges. So that's pretty nice if you accidentally break your screen. It looks pretty easy to remove from the chassis. Alright, so we have the motherboard disconnected and unscrewed, and we're going to go ahead and lift it up and pull inwards just like the in-out board so that these ports will clear the palm rest. And there we have the motherboard. So again, the motherboard has integrated Wi-Fi, and somewhere on this board are the integrated RAM chips. Alright, so looks like we're left with the touchpad and keyboard. And I'm going to get a little peek underneath the cover. Just see if I'm pretty sure that the keyboard is removable, but we're going to find out. Yeah. Most of the time with the aluminum chassis, they're going to use screws to attach the keyboard, and it's the same in this case. They have a bunch of small black Phillips head screws holding on the keyboard. So if you need to replace the keyboard, it's definitely possible. What they're doing now on the newer laptops that have a plastic palm rest is they're just using melted plastic rivets to hold that keyboard on. It's technically removable, but good luck getting it back on and to stay into place. So it's nice to see that they left this one as a removable keyboard. Alright, so it looks like we're ready to go ahead and separate that chassis from the display assembly. So to do that, we're going to just open it up. And so we got a speaker flopping around. So generally, what we want to do in this case is I'm going to remove, since it doesn't open up all the way, similar to a 2-in-1, I'm going to remove 2 screws from each side and just leave 1 screw in each hinge, and then we'll open it and remove the last 2 screws, because when you go to separate the 2 pieces, or actually when you're removing the screws, or the last part of the screws, you want to support the assembly from underneath, because it is going to separate once you remove the last 2 screws. And by just leaving the 2 in, it makes it easier to hold it and not have to remove 6 screws. We're just going to have to remove 2. Alright, we got those final screws out, and as you can see, the screen separates just fine from the chassis. It looks like the screws are just kind of, or the speakers are just kind of held on by grommets, so you definitely want to watch out for that if you're disassembling. Those speakers aren't really held in by anything. Alright, so what we have left is the display assembly, and on the chassis, like I said, the speakers are just held in by rubber grommets. Keyboard is definitely removable, and these Wi-Fi antennas, I don't see any screws, so they're definitely glued in. So if you need to replace your antennas, you're just going to have to kind of unstick them. So that's pretty much it for the chassis, and give one last look at the screen. So especially with these thin units, they're going to be super complicated to try to separate. And since they're a slimline, they don't usually hold the bezel or anything together with screws. It's usually just sandwiched together with a strong adhesive. So if you need to replace your screen assembly, buy it as an assembly. Don't just buy the screen and try to take this apart, because what's going to happen is you're usually going to break the front digitizer when you're trying to separate the two halves. Slimline laptops in general, you want to try to stay away from disassembling the screen. So that is it. That is how you take apart a Lenovo Ideapad S940. This is the 2019 model with the 10th gen Core i7. So if you found this video informative or you liked it, please like and subscribe. Thank you.